Today, we are starting a new series. We started a new book. We are in the book of Numbers, and this week is Torah portion is the first part of that. It's called Bamidbar. Bamidbar means in the desert, and it's actually the name in Hebrew of the book of Numbers. And as with all of the Torah portions, the first Torah portion of every book has the same name as the book itself. So that's what Bamidbar is. Now, I named this new series on the book of Numbers, the Nitty Gritty of Nationhood. And what we're going to see, it's actually a very interesting process that we see in the book of Numbers. Until now, of course, Exodus, we have the creation of the nation of Israel to begin with. The Exodus from Egypt, they're turning into a nation. The revelation at Sinai, they become the nation of God, covenant with God. That book ends on this amazing high of building the tabernacle. And then Leviticus is the driest of all, the books. And then we just have many, many laws that are given to the nation, many of them have to do with the tabernacle, with holiness and all that kind of stuff. In a way, it's a kind of a pause in the action. Wait, there's somebody here. Okay. There's sort of a pause in the action of what we've seen. And in the book of Numbers, we come back to the action. And in Numbers, though, keep in mind, we all know we're used to it. We've read these books so many times, so we know the story. But it's always a good thing to approach each Torah portion, each time you read it, as if you don't know the end of the story, as if you're reading it at the beginning to try to gain the excitement. And that's really what the book of Numbers is all about. The book of Numbers begins with preparing the nation to enter the land of Israel. At this point, they don't know that it's going to be another 38 years in the desert. They think it's just going to be another week or two in the desert. They're getting ready to go. And it starts like this. The first day, on the first day of the second month in the second year following the exodus from the land of Egypt, the Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the tent of meeting, saying, and what's the first thing he says? Take a census. Why is he taking a census? Well, let's look at verse 3. You and Aaron shall record them by their groups from the age of 20 years up, all those in Israel who are who can fight, who can bear arms. Okay? The purpose of this census is to get ready to go into the land of Israel. Because as soon as they go into the land of Israel, the first thing they're going to have to do is conquer the land. What are they going to have to do? They're going to have to build an army. So the first thing you do before you build an army is you figure out who you have, how many people you have, how you're going to organize them. And so the census that we see at the beginning of this is very much geared towards that, preparing to enter the land of Israel. Now, by the way, if you're wondering why, if the name Bamidbar is the Hebrew name for this book, which means in the desert, how did we get to the English Numbers? Okay. Now, the truth of the matter is that the books of all of the books of the Bible in English, these 5 at least, all reflect, they actually were originally in Greek, I believe, but they all reflect an additional name that's probably an older name for these books before the names we use today. And the original name of this book is in Hebrew, Sefer HaPkudim, which means the book of censuses, censi, I don't know, what's the plural of census, whatever. The book of the countings, but it's like a census, okay? And that's really is very interesting because this book begins with a census, and at the end of the book, we're going to have another census. And the census at the end of the book is going to have a very different flavor to it and a different purpose. But it's clearly that this initial census is part of the very practical, concrete preparations for building an army and going into the land of Israel. And it begins, of course, with the names of the leaders of every tribe, the princes of every tribe. We have that list, okay? And then we're going to start with the census. They take the census. Now, the first question I will ask you, how did they take the census? What was the mechanism? Now, I know in some countries today, they take a census. Somebody actually comes to your door, knocks on the door and asks you all kinds of questions, and they don't actually count everybody. but they do some kind of a rough, figuring out statistically. I don't know how they do that. In Israel, we don't have a census, but in Israel, we have an ongoing count because every single person in this country has an identity number. And therefore, you just count because you know how many people, everybody's registered in the system, so to speak. But in the time of the biblical times, they had a very specific way to take a census. And that we learned about back in the book of Exodus. So if you go to the book of Exodus, chapter 30, you're going to hear a very definite commandment from God, how it is you take a census. So if you look at chapter 30, verse 11, the Lord spoke to Moses saying, when you take a census of the Israelite people, according to their enrollment, each shall pay the Lord a ransom for himself on being enrolled, that no plague may come upon them through their being enrolled, through their being counted. Okay, so first of all, we learned something. They have to do something. They have to pay a ransom or pay some kind of a fee, okay, that will prevent plague. And what is that fee? This is what everyone who is entering the record shall pay, a half shekel by the sanctuary weight, 20 gerahs to the shekel, a half shekel as an offering to the Lord. And then we have in verse 15 that everybody gives exactly the same amount. This is not the kind of things that you give what you feel like, and if you're more generous, you give more. This is a very standard amount, half a shekel. And then we learn you shall take this money as an expiation from the children of Israel, and you will give it to the service of the tent of meeting. Okay, so the system of counting is by every single person in the country from at the right age, of course, of this military age, from the age of 20. Each person gives a half a shekel, and at the end what they do is they count the half a shekel. And we learn that if they do it this way, there will be no plague. Okay, now you may have recalled that in the time of David, okay, David counts. David does a census, and doesn't do the half a shekel. And indeed, there's a terrible plague that strikes the nation as a result. So it's very important that they do it this way. And there's different interpretations of why it's done this way. I will tell you that to this very day, there's a tradition in Israel that you should not count people. For example, you have a prayer quorum. If you're in synagogue or even not in synagogue, wherever you are, you want to have a prayer quorum and have a proper prayer service where people are praying together in a formal way. There's a minimum number of people for that quorum. It's 10 men. 10 men from the age of bar mitzvah, from the age of 13 and up. So there's a custom. Instead of going around the room and pointing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, counting all the people, you count in different ways. There's different tricks and different ways you're doing it to avoid actually counting people on their heads, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And it's just, this is the source of that, okay? There's this understanding that God doesn't want us counting people or heads, okay? They want to count shekels, okay? And some people you want to see an interpretation, perhaps it's the idea of people should never be quantities. People should never be numbers. People should never be reduced to numbers. You may need to know how many people are there, but in the end, you should be actually counting the shekels they gave, the half a shekels they gave, and not counting the people themselves. I think it's a nice idea. Never reduce people to numbers. But anyway, so it's interesting, though, that this actually, if you read the way it's written in the book of Exodus there, it all has to do with, the counting is mentioned, of course, but the focus of those verses, as well as the rest of the chapter, is about the work of the tabernacle. So it's really put there because the shekel themselves, the half a shekel themselves, is actually money that's income for the tabernacle, and it's used to cover the costs of the tabernacle. And so that is why it's there. But we have to keep that in mind when we see the census that is going on here at the very beginning of the book of Numbers. Now, let's take a look at some other verses that are here. Okay, verse 18. And on the first day, where am I? Okay, on the first day of the second month, they convoked the whole community. Okay, now here in my English translation, it says who were registered by the families. Okay, but I would dispute that translation because the word itself in Hebrew is vayit yaldu. And it comes from, the root of that word is giving birth. It's not just registered. We are counting those people based on who were born to these families, to the fathers' houses, in the names of those aged 20 years and over, listed head by head. Okay?
Sandra, I'm sorry, what chapter are you in?
Numbers chapter 1, and I just read verse 18.
Thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. So here you have, first of all, what are they counting? They're not just counting individuals and giving you a total number. You are counting the individuals as they belong to a family and as they belong to a, what they call a father's house. So you have, the smaller, more intimate family, and then the larger family. And that is before you get to the tribe. The tribe is the larger piece of that whole thing. And you'll notice here, as I said, the word that is used has to do with those born to those families. Now we're going to see 4 words actually in Hebrew, 4 words repeated over and over and over again. Every single time. We're now starting with verse 20. We're going to have every single tribe, how many people are in that tribe. And at the end, we're going to have a total, okay? Every time they list the number of a given tribe, they say the name of the tribe, and then they have these words in Hebrew. It's Toldotam, Lemishpechotam, Levet Avotam. They're descendants, but the word descendants is from the very same root in Hebrew as giving birth, okay? It's those who were birthed into that family, descendants to the family and to the house of the fathers. So the language here is about birth, family, fathers. It's all about the chain of the generations, the family unit that each individual person belongs to. It's not just all a nation. The nation that, Diane, were you trying to say something?
I'm sorry. No.
Okay. It's every single individual first has as an identity, a smaller identity than just the tribe or the nation. They have a family identity. So in the end, when they're counting the nation of Israel, they are essentially counting family units. And they're saying that the nation of Israel is built on the family, which I think is a very, very powerful message. And it's a message that really is quite typical of the way the Jewish people to this very day views themselves. Okay, we are one large family that consists of large families that consist of more closer families. And the way we see each other it's not just a national identity or a citizenship, but literally as one extended family. And the root of that type of identity really begins here in the book of Numbers. Okay, now we're going to have the list. Now I'm going to read to you the order beginning from chapter 20, verse 20 through verse 42. We have the very same kind of language, every single tribe. Again, their family identity, their tribal identity, and how many there are. But listen to the order here. Reuben, Simeon, Gad, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Ephraim, Manasseh, Benjamin, Dan, Asher, Naphtali. Okay, now what kind of order is that? It's not based on age of the original sons. It's not based on age. It's not even based on mothers. Okay, not really, because there are 4 mothers. Jacob had 4 wives. He had Leah, Rachel, and he had the 2 different maids, Bilhah and Zilpah. So it doesn't seem to be organized by that either. What exactly is the order here? What's the basis of the chronology? Okay, that's the first question I'll ask. And the second question I ask is, there is one tribe that's missing. The tribe that is missing, of course, is Levi. Levi is going to be counted separately. Okay? Levi has its own separate census, which is in chapter 2. So chapter 1, we have, chapter 3. Chapter 3 has its own census just for Levi, okay? Now, what happens in chapter 2? Chapter 2, we have the order of the camp. The Ark of the Covenant and the tabernacle is in the middle. And then the camp is very there's a very specific way each tribe has his flag. Each side of the tabernacle, there are 4 directions, north, south, east, and west. Each has 3 tribes, okay? So if we read the order of the camp surrounding the tabernacle, we will discover that it is the order of the camp that defines the order of the census in chapter 1. On the south, we have Reuben, Simeon, and Gad, and that is called the first one listed is actually the one who's sort of like the head of that side. So it is the camp of Reuben, to which Simeon and Gad are connected, and that's the south. On the east, we have the camp of Judah, to which Issachar and Zebulun are connected. On the west, we have the tribe of Ephraim, to which Manasseh and Benjamin are connected. And in the north, we have the tribe of Dan, to which Asher and Naphtali are connected. So if we want to also look at what this order means, okay, so let's look first at east and west. East and west is the center in a sense. The north is above, the south is below, but let's look at the east and west kind of, along the same line with the tabernacle. We will see that we have the camp of Judah and the camp of Ephraim. Judah and Ephraim throughout history will be the 2 tribes that lead the nation. Okay, we know that Judah will be the kingship will come from Judah. David will be the king, and God that promises David that kings of Israel will always come from him, will always be descendants of David, and the Messiah himself is a descendant of David. But Ephraim, on the other hand, is always a competing tribe. And we see this even in the book of Judges, where we have Ephraim taking the lead. We have potential civil wars and various times between Ephraim and Judah. And of course, this comes to a head after the death of Solomon in the book of Kings, where Jeroboam literally rebels against the United Kingdom of Israel, and we end up with 2 competing kingdoms. The kingdom of Judah, led, of course, by the descendant of David, the tribe of Judah, with a couple other hangers-on. And on the other hand, in the north, the Ephraim, the northern kingdom, the kings of the northern kingdom, beginning from Jeroboam, are from Ephraim. Okay, so these become these 2 parallel things. So Judah and Ephraim, it makes sense. These are 2 leaders of Israel, and it makes sense that these are the leaders of the 2 camps. So how do we explain Reuben and Dan? Well, Reuben is actually the oldest. He's the firstborn. So you can say, even though he loses his status as being a literal firstborn, he's not going to be, he's not going to end up having the kingship from him, but Reuben still has a certain status. He is the original firstborn, so he leads that camp. Dan, what's Dan? Dan, of course, is the firstborn of the wives who are the maids, okay? So if you take into account, there are actually 4 wives, but if we put the 2 maid wives together, each one had 2 children, the firstborn of this whole new gimmick, let's give a maid to Jacob and have him have a child, and then either Rachel or Leah will help raise those children. The oldest of that is Dan. So that has a certain rationale to it as well. Also, you can see there's also certain internal logic. For example, in the camp of Ephraim, the other 2 with him are Manasseh and Benjamin. These are the 3, of course, Ephraim and Manasseh are really the sons of Joseph. These 3 tribes represent the sons of Rachel. So they are together in one camp, okay? On the other hand, if you look at Judah is a son of Leah, and he's together with 2 other sons of Leah, Issachar and Zebulun. Dan, who we said was the oldest of the children of the maids, is together with 2 other children of the maids, Asher and Naphtali. The one that's a little bit problematic is Reuben. Reuben is together with his brother Simeon. But what is God doing there? Reuben and Simeon, of course, are children of Leah. And the only thing I can think of here is that God, even though he is a son of one of the maids and belongs with Dan, Asher, and Naphtali, each camp can only have 3. It's 4 camps, 12 tribes. Each has, so God gets moved from the Dan camp up to the Reuben camp. Why him and not some of the others? I have no idea. But this is just to give you a sense of the order. Okay, now let's move on to Levi, and let's see what we can learn about them and why they are counted separately. So if I look in chapter, let's see, chapter 3, verse 49, okay? No, I'm in the wrong place. That's not where I want to be. Where am I? Verse 49. Okay, yes, in chapter 1, verse 49, we learn that Levi is not going to be counted with the others. We have here, what does the scripture say? Do not, let's see, for the Lord has spoken to Moses saying, do not count the heads of the tribe of Levi. Do not count them within the children of Israel. You shall put the Levites in charge of the tabernacle of testimony, the tabernacle of testimony, all its furnishings and everything that pertains to it. Okay? So what we learn here is that, why is it that Levite is separate? If we remember when we talked about the census of the rest of the nation, it was a very military census. Every single person there is counted, and it is mentioned that these are the people that will go out into the army. They are going to be part of the military. Levite, however, does not participate in the war. They have a different kind of job. Their job has to do with serving God and serving the tabernacle. So therefore, they are counted separately because their numbers will never be counted for a military count. They have a separate count because they fulfill a very separate function. And we can see that in chapter 2, verse 17. Chapter 2, again, when we talk about the camps and the order of the camps, what do we learn about the Levites? Midway between the divisions, the tent of meeting, the division of the Levites shall move. As they camp, so they shall march, each in position by their standards. So that there is no camp for Levite, because the camp of the tabernacle itself is the camp of the Levites. So they are, it's not just that they are arranged separately, but they are attached to the tabernacle. Everybody else is attached to outside the tabernacle. They're going to be part of the military, but the Levite, their camp is the camp of the tabernacle. Okay. And just to reinforce this idea of the army, look at chapter 1, verse 48. When they total the entire count of the camp without the Levites, we have in chapter 1, verse 45, all the Israelites aged 20 years and over enrolled by their ancestral houses, by their fathers' houses, all those in Israel who were able to bear arms. And then it gives the number 603,550. Okay, so again, the total number, these are the people who can bear arms. That's very much part of this. Okay, now let's move on. In chapter 3, when we have the census of the Levite family, and we go through all of that, we have an interesting development here that is very much in connection with what we have just read about the Levites not being in the military, but they're being part of the tent or part of the camp of the tabernacle. And what do we learn here in chapter 3, verse 11? The Lord spoke to Moses saying, I hereby take the Levites from among the children of Israel in place of all the firstborn. The first issue of the moon among the children of Israel, the Levites shall be mine. For every firstborn is mine. At the time that I smote every firstborn in the land of Egypt, I consecrated every firstborn in Israel, man and beast, to myself, to be mine, the Lord's. So we have two things going on here, and it's a little bit out of order. But actually, God is reminding us that he sanctified the firstborn. And we remember that is back in Exodus. One second. Exodus chapter 13. This is part of God's final instructions to Moses before the Exodus. And he's telling instructions that he has to give to the nation of Israel about celebrating the Passover and other things. What does he say? Consecrate to me every firstborn man and beast, the first issue of every womb among the nation, among the Israelites is mine. And then we are going to see that as well in the context of the striking of the firstborn of Egypt. So we have this, and that's what we have here in this verse, where on the one hand, God is striking the firstborn of Egypt, but the firstborn of Israel, he is taking to himself. He is not only protecting them from the plague of the firstborn, but he is consecrating them, giving them a special job. Okay? The assumption is that the original plan, or at least the way it was assumed or the way it was done until this point, is that it's the firstborn who have a special role in the tabernacle as serving God. Here, God says we're going to do a switch, okay? Whereas I have consecrated the firstborn, and I still treat the firstborn as very holy and special to me. However, instead of the firstborn, it is the Levites who will serve God in the tabernacle. And then we go forward and we have the count of the Levites. And then we have, again, we're still in chapter 30, verse 40, we have a count of the firstborns of all the tribes. The Lord said to Moses, record every firstborn male of the Israelites people from the age of 1 month and up, and make a list of their names. And take the Levites for me, the Lord, in place of every firstborn among the Israelite people. And it continues. And what we basically have here is two separate counts. We have a count of the Levites, which is part of the census. Each tribe has its own census, and the Levites are counted separately. We have that count. But then God says, go back to all those people you counted already, but not from 20 years and up, from 1 month and up. Count the firstborn. And we come to a couple of numbers here, okay? We have 22,273 firstborns. And in the verses above, in verse 39, we learn that there are 22,000 Levites. So there are 273 more firstborns than there are Levites. And God has said, we're going to make a switch here. We're going to take the Levites and to have them serve in the tabernacle instead of the firstborn. And then we have a very interesting thing goes on, because for the first 22,000 firstborns, there is a Levite for every firstborn. So you take a Levite and you put him in the tabernacle, and you symbolically take a firstborn and pull him out of the tabernacle. It's an even switch. But then it turns out there's an extra 273 firstborns, and there's no Levite to switch with them. So theoretically, these people remain holy to God. They are dedicated to the service of God, but God wants the Levites in the temple. He doesn't want the firstborns in the temple. How do we redeem these 273? And then we have the instruction here in verse 47. Take 5 shekels per head. Take this by the sanctuary weight, 20 gerahs to the shekel, and give the money to Aaron and his sons as the redemption price for all those who are in excess. Okay, what happens is that God says you take 5 shekels, 5 silver pieces of this particular weight, and you take it and you give it to Aaron, who's the high priest, and you redeem the firstborn. Okay, this is a ceremony. This is something, this was done in the desert, but this is something that we do to this very day. Today, when a baby boy is born, he is the first baby born to the woman, and it has to be born in a natural way. He has to be the first one to open the womb. So it has to be the firstborn. If the firstborn is a girl, that's it. You lost it. You don't have a firstborn boy in your family. Your firstborn has to be a boy. It has to open the womb, which means it cannot have come via C-section, okay? If you have that type of a boy who was first born and not a C-section, then you have to redeem him. The tradition today is on the 30th day of a baby boy's, firstborn baby boy's birth, from his birth, on his 30th day, you have a ceremony, and you take 5 silver shekels, and you give those 5 silver shekels to a Kohen, to a priest. And by the way, most people, just about anybody who has a last name Cohen or Kohen or Kahan or Kahana, these are priests. And you find a guy like that, and you give him the 5 silver shekels, and then he symbolically gives you back the baby. No Cohen that I know of has ever walked away with a baby, but they take the silver shekels. And indeed, the state of Israel has a minting and medallion service, and they have minted 5 silver coins to be used for this purpose. And it has this engraved on it some kind of emblem having to do with the firstborn. And it's a very special thing. I had a firstborn son, and when he was 30 days old, we did this redemption ceremony as well. So here you have it. We have a account that goes back and seems so technical, and yet we have this very same custom to this very day. And it's a way of saying, you know what? The Levites had their rule, but God said to Moses, Exodus chapter 4, Israel is my firstborn son. There has always and will always be something special to God about the firstborn sons of Israel. That's all for today.
Hope you enjoyed that video. And we'd like to be sure you're getting all of our video content. So just click on the subscribe button below, as well as on the notification bell. And that way you will have easy access to all our material.